It's those things that crop up that you would never expected, and that basically make you have to retrain your dog or go over something again with them that maybe they didn't need that reinforcement on before. Welcome to episode 20 of the Pawdoption Guide podcast. I'm your host, Bethany Muir, and this is your one-stop shop for the knowledge and advice you need to adopt and then integrate the rescue dog of your dreams. Let's just get right down to it. We're going to take a closer look at the beginning of the dog adoption journey today, which starts with the decision to adopt. And more specifically, the decision people make to adopt a second dog. There's many reasons why people choose to do this, and I saw those lots when I worked in the vet clinic. So, when we decided to get Rory and add her to the mix, we already had Geller at that time, we were looking for a companion for my dog Geller. We thought that he'd appreciate having another dog around, and especially when we were going to look to be having kids, we thought that another dog might, really help with that transition where all of a sudden he's not the only child anymore. Or, we had Hudson, but, it's different dogs to cats. So we just thought that would help with the transition a bit and make sure it was a little less lonely when we were, managing the kids so much at that time. And then we also thought that another dog might encourage him to play more or be more active. Like, he was the couch potatoes of all couch potatoes. He really didn't care if you took him for a walk or not. It didn't make his day better by any means. Like, he just wanted to be with us wherever we were, and that's all he cared about. So we just thought, having another dog might really bring out another side of his personality and perk him up a little. You couldn't get him to play with toys. He wouldn't run around the backyard with you. He was pretty laid back, chill dog. And we just thought it'd be nice to see how he does with another dog, knowing that he was really good with other dogs that we had been around. Getting a companion is one of the most popular reasons that people get a second dog, and usually, getting that companion for their other dog. But otherwise, some people do it because they want something their first dog isn't providing. So, some dogs aren't very playful, like Geller. And so they always wanted to be able to play fetch with their dog, and their dog doesn't do that. So, that it's basically fulfilling that dream of theirs. And, some just want another dog because they have more love to share and room to spare, and or they just want to help a homeless dog. They just have it in their heart to reach out to another dog. Heck, I've heard lots of people getting a second dog because their first dog is older now, and they never want to be without a dog, or they have kids and they don't want them to go through the same grief process that happens when you have no dogs in the home. It feels like your house isn't a home without one, right? So I've heard that one quite a bit, which kind of always surprised me. Not necessarily something I would think about doing myself, but I often find that's probably a bit of a hard transition for the resident dog because, it is older. So it's been there, things have been a certain way its whole life, and then, they're getting older, they're having some difficulties, and now you're adding a new dog to the mix. So it can be a bit stressful for that dog. So that's why I'm a bit more hesitant with that approach. But really, there's so many motivators for getting a second dog. And I want you to know that 2 dogs is not always better than 1. it's really easy to picture all the good that can come from having two dogs, but we don't often think about the hardships or the difficulties that can arise. And so I'm going to offer you a little bit of perspective on this, as I've been through it myself. And I think that having both sides of the story when you're considering this decision is super important. So here are the 5 things you need to know before getting a second dog. Number 1, there may be a dynamic change. So all animals have social structures, and even if that social structure is just that animal likes to exist independently from others. So when you go from having one dog to having two dogs, there is a dynamic that is created. And this dynamic can have an effect on dog dynamics outside of the home too, or with previously known dog playmates. So a good example of this is our resident dog, Geller, had been really easygoing with new dogs in the past. We would visit dog parks, maybe even see dogs on our walks. And although I didn't necessarily make them always have nose-to-nose interactions or anything, because you do want to try and avoid that with dogs, we'd go past one another, really no issues, super comfortable, laid back. So we also took Geller to dog parks, and in general, he kind of just kept to himself, or he would associate with one or two other dogs at the park, but he wasn't the life of the party. He wasn't running in, getting involved in the big dog packs running around. But he was easygoing with the other dogs there. He was mainly there for that unlimited roaming. That was the reason for us taking him to dog parks. Rory was quite social and easygoing with other dogs too when we got her. I would say she was probably more social than Geller was with other dogs. She easily met and got along with the family dogs that we have, that we regularly encounter. However, we visited the dog park once or twice after we got Rory, and immediately the two of them behaved so differently with the other dogs at the park. So they acted like a pack, really. So Geller was the first that would display some aggression. So it seemed like Geller would instigate the kind of negative interaction. And so, he might just bark or growl or just show some body language that wasn't very relaxed, kind of stiff, tense body language. And with any of that barking or growling, Rory would quickly provide some backup and start barking too. And so we were able to gain control of our dogs before any harm came of that kind of tense situation. But that was something we had never seen before. And it was quite concerning. And of course, I don't love the idea of just being oh, okay, pack them up, we got to go. But it just seemed like the dynamic had changed. And we tried again with them. And of course, we had pretty good recall on our dogs at this time, or I probably wouldn't have tried it. But again, those sorts of things cropped up almost immediately, that Geller would kind of instigate a scenario where, again, all he's doing is just showing some tense body language, barking, growling, and then we just broke it up. We're okay, no need for Rory to join in here, and she would just quickly kind of provide backup for him. Yeah, from there on, we just stopped taking the dogs to the dog park because we could tell that there was this new dynamic, that all of a sudden strange dogs weren't okay anymore, and there was this kind of team up mentality. If Geller saw a dog he didn't really appreciate, then Rory would join in, and eventually Geller became the one who was a bit more easier to manage around other dogs, and Rory would be the instigator. So this dog aggression extended into our walks in that regard, and it became something that we had to undo with no sign of it having existed before we added a second dog to our household. And that has certainly been one of the biggest challenges we've dealt with, because it takes great consistency and, being very observant on your walks. But we're definitely doing pretty great now, and it's quite manageable, but it has changed the dynamic. It's no longer we can just easily meet other dogs on our walk, that sort of thing. Now we just stay away from other dogs on our walk, and we can do fine that way, but we no longer have that social ability that we had before. Number 2, new nuisance behaviors can arise in your resident dog. So when I talk about your resident dog, I'm talking about the dog that lived with you first, not the new addition. So another challenge can really be that your second dog brings with it some of those less desirable behaviors that require training, which, that's not surprising. You expect to work on some things with your new dog, but what can be upsetting is that the resident dog then sometimes starts to follow the new dog's example and take on some of those behaviors. So most often you'll see barking can be one of those undesirable behaviors that is just contagious. If you've ever visited a shelter or a kennel, you'll see that there's often a lot of barking that goes on, and that's just because one dog started it and then the other dogs joined in, and it's contagious. And they can be great dogs and then leave that kennel and not be crazy barkers, but it's that environment that harbors that, and that's where that can really happen when you bring a dog in that's maybe not so well behaved, and then that influences your resident dog. Unfortunately, it can go both ways. So if your current dog exhibits some negative behavior and isn't, the most well-mannered dog before you get a new dog, so say they have separation anxiety, or they're destructive when you leave, or destructive when you're around, it's possible the new dog may follow their lead. They go, oh, they chew on the baseboards. Maybe I'll do that. Or apparently we're allowed to chew on furniture here, and just follow what that other dog has shown them. So in our household, we had a great deal of difficulty walking Rory for the first while after we adopted her. She was like pulling at the end of the leash, and again, we knew this when we adopted her. We knew she was this big a challenge, and I took it on. I wanted to take it on, but it took a long time to manage her on a lead. And once we started walking the dogs together, we didn't really have a great handle on Rory's training yet. We were just using a easy walk harness at that time, and it just made it more manageable, but she was still pulling. And this encouraged Geller to start pulling on his walks, because I think he just always wanted to be at the same place she was on the lead or ahead of us. And clearly she should have been at our side. And unfortunately, we just didn't have a good enough handle on her, and we should have just kept training her one-on-one. But we added Geller into the mix because we were impatient, and we wanted to do our walks together in the morning again. And that's when Geller started to pull more. And he had really been easygoing on dog walks previously. Now, of course, he is more responsive, so, he just needs a little bit of a leash tug, and, he's into place. So, he's not a big deal, but he's not so much like that with other people who don't know that, right? So just friend or family member wants to walk Geller, they'll think that he's pulling quite a bit, and especially in comparison to what he would have done before Rory. But really, he just needs that leadership and us to reinforce that we're going to control where we're going today. And it was too bad because he was so easy going on walks. But we've learned to manage that behavior, and we're much better off now and have been for some time. But still, it's those things that crop up that you would never expected, and that basically make you have to retrain your dog or go over something again with them that maybe they didn't need that reinforcement on before. If you do find that you're having difficulty with your second dog, or if your first dog is currently not walking well on leash, I highly recommend you head to my website at www.pawdoptionguide.com/walk your dog with confidence mini course. I've got a great course that will help you handle any of those surprises that your dogs throw at you while walking them on lead. So, you can quit being embarrassed by your dog's behavior on walks and just ditch those fears and gain control today with my free mini course. It's a video course, so all you got to do is just sit there, watch it, and take in all the suggestions I give you that really were taught to me through our struggles with teaching Rory how to walk on leash. We tried so many methods that I've broken 3 down for you and given you like the tools and the aids that I use that helped us get to that point, because it's not always just a direct, this one scenario works for every dog, just do it this way, this works. Sometimes you need to be able to just literally control the dog with a halty first or a harness first, so that you can get to the next step and you can gain some attentiveness on leash before you move on to training them on a method. So if your dog's really hard to control, I highly suggest just checking out this video course because it really is the culmination of all my efforts to train Rory how to walk on leash when she came from just such a dismal place in that department. The third thing you need to know before getting a second dog is that complicates training for you and your dogs. So training often needs to be done on a one-on-one basis, as when you're responding to your dog's behavior in training, that helps dictate how fast your dog learns. So if your attention is split between 2 dogs and how they're both reacting at the time when you're training, it makes it a slower process, and it doesn't necessarily give them that same direct feedback that they need. So for instance, you're telling them both to sit and then you have to give the treat. If you're not immediately giving them both the treat at the same time, right? That there's a delay, and that can affect their responsiveness and what they're taking away from that lesson. So with 2 dogs, you'll have to split your training sessions and separate your dogs so that you can focus on one at a time. And so for me, I know that it means like having one go down to the basement with me. Well, what if I want to work on door training at the back door? Well, it just, maybe the other has to go in a crate or in a room for some time, so that you don't have to worry about getting them to sit and stay on their bed. When you just only have so much time to spend on training, it can just be a frustrating thing to add. And I found that it was just another barrier to training, and it reduced how likely I was to follow through with training, every day, those 5-minute stints. It just became a bit more of a hassle, because I had to manage 2 dogs, or had to go, put one place or get them on their place, or keep encouraging them to stay on their place while I was training the other. So again, what I was saying with, if you do attempt to train both your dogs at once, you will often find that you're torn between your dogs and their differing needs or responses. So you might not be giving them what they need at that moment. So for instance, if your dog is a bit reactive on their walk, then you might have to stop and go back to your home. While the other dog has been good and is deserving of a longer walk, you need to listen to the one dog's needs rather than the other. So that can definitely divide you a bit when you're caring for your dogs, and be a frustrating thing, because that you have limitations just because of this second dog that you have. I certainly felt this in my household. I know The amount of training I can do with my dogs is reduced because of the hassle to focus on one and not the other. And I will ping pong between training one at a time and training two at a time because I want to satisfy both of their needs at the same time. And it's not unlike having two kids, like you can't always be there for both of them. So sometimes one takes priority or the other, and then sometimes you try to care for both of them at once to do things that they both like, but that doesn't necessarily always turn out either. So not dissimilar from that. Number 4, travel capacity. Your travel capacity changes. You might plan to take your dog with you everywhere and anywhere, but that might not always be the case when you have 2 dogs. So the size of your dogs can certainly factor into this. So if you have 2 really small dogs, it may not be the same issue. But certainly if you have 2 medium-sized dogs or 2 large dogs or giant dogs, this can create a bit of a barrier to traveling with both of them. So not only their size, but and whether they can fit with you in your travels, but also all the items that you need to take along for them, which kind of multiplies when you have more than one. So their food, their beds, their crates, their toys, all of that. And so twice that amount is a lot, and it's a lot to expect that you can manage that when you're traveling. And another factor in those travel plans is that if that change in dynamic is there could be differing behaviors or differing needs between the two that can mean that they're not really easy travel companions anymore. So, for instance, say the dogs need quite a bit of space and you can't have them both in the same row in the car when you're driving. Well, that might be really hard if you have to take your crates and your food and your toys and all that stuff, right? So that can make that a more difficult experience. And even, for instance, when we would take Geller camping prior to getting our dog Rory, he was just the perfect camping dog. However, when we got Rory, she was not. We knew that she had stranger danger issues and was likely to do a lot of alert barking. Especially if we were outside, she would likely hear someone's voice in the distance, or hear a car door, or people laughing, or other dogs, and that would just kind of set her off. And we needed to be in a more manageable environment when we were with Rory. So that really meant that we could not take Rory with us camping. And rather than just taking one and not the other, we kind of knew that with Geller, he now had some dog reactivity issues. So when previously he was fantastic and ignored the dogs, he now would not do the same, even if Rory wasn't there. So that changed our ability to go camping with Geller. And now we just choose to leave them both. And of course, you create that bond as well between the 2 dogs. So if you take one and not the other, sometimes people feel bad about that too. I know sometimes even just taking my one dog to the vet and not the other, it's just not something that happens a lot, that just one is left in the house. So there can be that dependency that's created as well. So, just little things here, but they do make a huge difference. If you've always dreamed of taking your dog camping and you could do that, but then all of a sudden you can't anymore, it changes, that fulfillment of dog ownership for you. Like, I certainly loved that. And we had this scary moment when we were in the tent when we traveled with Geller, and we thought, is there bears or some animals outside? And it was really just raccoons going at our garbage, but our garbage was hanging near our tent, so there was like scratching at the tent. Well, Geller got up and he just did this deep bark, and he scared them away, and I love that. And I won't be able to have that at this point in time, maybe down the road with another dog, but getting 2 dogs changes things. And the last point I'd like to make is that the care multiplies. So twice the love also equals twice the vet bills, food bills, grooming. We'd have some clients come into the vet clinic with both of their dogs for their annual vaccines, their exams, their heartworm testing, and then they would usually leave with their heartworm prevention for the year and their tick prevention for the year. And when all was said and done, they could be dropping like $1,000 on those 2 dogs. And that's not a problem for some. And certainly I hope that before you get a second dog, you're thinking about your financial situation. But I think it's just, again, easy to just not really pay attention to how much that can add up. So, these annual or monthly costs really do amount to a lot. And I was looking at a few studies of the yearly cost of owning a dog, and it's anywhere from $1,500 to $2,500. You will be doubling that. Another important way that your care multiplies is in pet sitting services. So if you ever plan to go on vacation or go away without your dogs, if you have a family member or friend watching your dogs when you travel, that could be more difficult with 2 dogs instead of 1. So again, like the traveling, if you have to take them someplace with all their supplies and there's 2 of them now, that can be a lot. And some pet sitters might not have the space for 2 of them. Or there could also be a change in the dynamic, which makes it hard for them to care for both of your dogs. Maybe they could do the one before, but now there's 2 of them. If they take them on a walk, they can't really do that, and your dogs can't go without walks. So, that's definitely difficult. Or if your pet sitter had a dog at home and say now the dogs aren't so great with other dogs anymore, or one is great but not the other, again, that all of a sudden makes that not an option. Or maybe you have to split both dogs and give one to someone and one to the other. And again, they maybe have some dependency or they have some separation anxiety, not being together. That's fine, but it's just twice the work. Really, like the pet sitting situation will really change for you. And you may find your previous pet sitter can't help you out anymore, or that you need someone now to come stay at your house to watch the dogs. Well, if you require an overnight kennel, you could expect to pay upwards of $62 a night for both your dogs, or upwards of $40 for a pet sitter per night. So the care multiplies, and financially that's a real thing. So hopefully you have some savings set aside, an emergency fund, or pet insurance, so that you have coverage for the unexpected things, because all of these things are expected, but is really when those unexpected costs come into play that we get a little bit more concerned or frazzled, because we're already considerably increasing how much we spend on a monthly basis or a yearly basis. I don't want this all to sound doom and gloom. I just know how easy it is to think about all the good that can come when you adopt another dog, but there is often less desirable changes that happen too, and we often don't talk openly about those. And I think part of that is because we don't want people to think we resent getting a second dog, or that we don't love our second dog as much, or that we wish it didn't happen. This episode is just a cautionary tale that more is not always merrier. And if you've never had 2 dogs before, you likely wouldn't know that. And that was the case for me. And especially as it was pretty early on in my tech career when we got Rory, I hadn't had the same exposure to a lot of multi-dog households. And if you've had a second dog, you'll know that no 2 dogs are the same. So it's not always likely that you'll get that same dynamic that you had experienced before. So even if you had just a completely blissful integration with a second dog and you really had no negative changes, that's great. But that might not be the case the next time around. So although I do caution you about considering these 5 things before you adopt a second dog, I would not change my decision to get another dog, and I don't regret it. It's not to say that I never felt that way, or even just for a minute or two. I know I was meant to be both of their owners. I know I was meant to have Rory, and I know I was meant to have Geller. And I have worked so hard, and I still do, every day to keep our family unit happy. However, I'm not the average dog owner. I put more effort into finding training solutions when problems arise, more effort into enriching them and giving them things that keep them happy, and that environmental enrichment that we require with dogs that have dealt with dog aggression and, Rory's stranger danger ways and all that. So I really do put a lot of effort into caring for these two dogs on a regular basis, more than most would, because I'm an RVT. I'm also more willing to spend more on my dogs because they are a top priority in my life. And I just really want dog owners to know that getting a second dog is not a decision you should make lightly, and that new family members are bound to change things for the better and possibly the worst. So you'll need to be prepared to work harder and address scenarios that you haven't had to before, but it could also be incredibly worthwhile, which it has been for me. So no regrets here. I love my two dogs, and they've taught me so much, but it is a whole nother level of dog ownership, I will tell you. If you enjoyed this episode, take a screenshot and give me a shout out on Instagram stories or your Facebook stories at Pawdoption Guide. Subscribe or follow this podcast to get notified when new episodes drop, or you can check in every Thursday. That's it for today. Stay well, my friends. Thanks for listening.